Happy Tuesday. I hope people had the opportunity to enjoy the long weekend and have yesterday off for some rest. My name is Jessica Herring Watson. I'm an instructor in the College of Education in the Department of Teaching and Learning. I work with undergraduate and graduate students and teach a variety of courses, but a lot of my work centers around educational technology and how we use technology in the classroom. And so in today's session, we are going to focus on how we can help our students cultivate a balanced digital diet. Many of us, because of the pandemic, have spent the last year spending more time in front of a screen than maybe we ever have before. And so it becomes important for us to reflect on that time and think about how we're using that time, if we're using it really purposefully, so that students are being reflective about their own practices, not just thinking about how they're using technology in the classroom, but also thinking about how they're using technology in their everyday lives and interactions. Before we get started, I will tell you, you will receive a PD certificate for this session in a couple of days. It should get sent to your email that you use to register. And then this session is also being recorded and it will be posted to UCA's YouTube channel in the next 2 weeks. So if you want to revisit this information, or if you registered and you were not able to join live, you can find the information from this session there. Feel free as we go through this session to use the chat box. If you have questions or reflections, something is resonating with you, and you want to talk about it or share your thinking, I would love to have that interaction in the chat. And then we'll also use the breakout rooms a couple of times for you to have some opportunity to interact with one another and have some discussion around this topic. So that being said, let's get started. Let's start with a little check-in. I really love this blob tree. So if you look at all the little people on the tree, they all have numbers. Tell us in the chat, what number are you today? How are you feeling? What number are you feeling like today? Yeah. Trying to find 15. Someone said 15. Love it. A lot of different numbers here. I think this is a really great check-in. I use this with some of my students as we move through this semester. And it was a really good way to just check in on where they were, how they were feeling. I like that it's open to interpretation. You can decide what the number person represents for you, but it just provides a good check-in. From what I'm seeing, we got a lot of different feelings coming into the room today. I don't know what number I am today. Maybe a 6. Maybe I'm feeling like a 6. 9 looks like it's having a lot of fun. So maybe I'm feeling like a 9 every now and then. All right, so bring that number with you. Hopefully by the end of the session, you feel like you've gained something and you're feeling good about your learning for the day. So as I said, my name is Jessica Herring Watson. My contact information is on this slide. If you want to take a picture of it, I'll share my information again at the end of this session. But I am always happy to serve as a resource. If you ever have an ed tech question and you want to send it my way, we can connect on Twitter or you can email me. Happy to connect with you today and absolutely into the future if you ever need anything after the session. So I'll put this information up again at the end as well. I also want to take a minute before we get into today's content to talk about the different online degree programs that we offer at the University of Central Arkansas. We have a variety of programs that may be useful to you if you're considering extending your learning with another degree program or even maybe just another class or two. We have so many options available, everything from advanced studies in teacher leadership and digital aids teaching and learning, to instructional leadership, educational leadership, counseling. So all of these are great options. If you're ever interested in pursuing one of these programs, we would love to have you at the University of Central Arkansas. So with that, let's dig in. We said we're going to talk today about cultivating a balanced digital diet. That can feel really challenging. I know there are probably a lot of people after this school year and all of the time that we have had to spend on devices who are like, let's just shut the laptops. I can't even with this. But we have to remember as educators that our students are living in an increasingly connected world. We have so much access to information that we have to wade through every day, whether that is accessing media through more conventional means, or accessing that information through social media, getting that information directly from friends and family, and then trying to figure out, how do I fact check this information? How do I check in with myself to make sure I'm being reflective about the information that I'm taking in and the information that I'm sharing with others? And so before we talk about some strategies for digital citizenship, I think it's really important that we start with the why. So I'm going to show you some data around student device ownership and device usage. And as we move through this data, I want you to think about what you notice in the data and what it makes you wonder. Now, I'm going to tell you on the front end, this data is from 2019, and that's intentional. I wanted us to look at the numbers pre-pandemic, because I think it's important for us to kind of have a benchmark of what did the landscape of technology use look like for our students, our elementary kids, middle and high school learners, before we had this big disruption in our lives and in education, and in how we educate, how we're working with students in the K-12 space. So we're going to start with the why and look at some data together. So let's start with device ownership. You can see from 2015 to 2019, we saw a significant increase in device ownership. By age 11, over half of kids own a smartphone. By age 17, 18, we're seeing almost 90% of all kids, and this is a pretty large sample size in this particular study. This was the Common Sense Census, are owning a smart device. And those numbers are higher in older teenagers than they are in tweens. But again, this survey data was collected from kids as young as 8. Okay, so let's move along to the next one. So we know a lot of kids have access to devices. I think we've seen more of that as more and more schools in the past year have adopted one-to-one initiatives. So maybe they don't own their own personal device, but they do have access to a device, whether it's during the traditional school day or outside of the school day. So now let's look at screen time. Keep in mind these screen time numbers are not inclusive of the amount of time students are spending on devices for schoolwork. So this is screen time outside of completing any digital schoolwork. So in 2019, the majority of tweens fall into that kind of 2 to 8 hour space. And then we see those numbers trend upward toward 4 to 8 hours or 8+ hours for teens in 2019. Be thinking about, and we'll take some time to unpack what you notice in this data, what stands out to you, and what it makes you wonder. Okay, so we've looked at device ownership, we've looked at screen time. So now let's look at, okay, they're on devices. How are they using that time on the device? We can see that the average tween is spending a little under 5 hours on their device, total screen time on average. The vast majority of that time is being spent on TVs and videos, so very much consuming behaviors. And then the same is true for teens, but we see that number go up significantly, almost 7.5 hours of screen time a day on average. Most of that time spent, or time I think spent a little more evenly between consuming TV and videos and gaming, but we see an increase in their social media usage, scrolling on social media. All right. So we've looked at how they're spending that time. So now let's look specifically at time spent creating. We know that both tweens and teens, at least from this data set, are spending the majority of their time consuming. But let's look at, are they creating? Are they using these devices creatively? I think this is really interesting. None of the content creation activities that were asked about in this survey, things like creating digital art, making music, coding, creating or modifying games, none of those things were things that respondents, young people, said that they enjoyed a lot or often. And on average, tweens, students between the ages of 8 and 12, we're spending about 7 minutes a day in content creation, and teens only reported spending about 12 minutes of that almost 7.5 hours on creating. So I'll let you look at those numbers for just a minute, and then I'm going to move you forward. So if students are saying, I'm not spending this time on my device creating, I'm spending my time consuming, I think it's interesting to view that up against what teachers say. So this is a Gallup poll from 2019 called Creativity and Learning. 52% of teachers say that students are often working on projects with real world applications, but only 26% of students agree with that same statement. So if we look at the data, students tend to think that they're using technology to practice things they've already learned, for repetition. And they also tend to think that they are memorizing facts and definitions, that they're learning how to do well on tests. So I think it's really interesting. Students don't perceive the kinds of assignments they're getting on technology as creative or having the same level of real world relevance as teachers do. They're seeing it much more as like drill and practice, repetition, test focused. So I think that's a really interesting difference in perception between teachers and students. So I'm curious, tell me in the chat, or tell us, because we want everyone to be able to share their thinking, what surprises you or resonates with you when you think about these different statistics, these survey results? Mm-hmm. Yeah, some interesting ideas here. Rayanne said, I think it's interesting that students don't view their projects or work as real world relevant, given how digital our world is becoming. Students are spending so much of their time being entertained, so consuming more than creating. Yeah, Andrea said she was surprised by the percentage of students creating being higher between 8 to 12 and not older. I think that's surprising to me too. Yeah, that amount of time spent consuming. I think that's the thing that stands out to me the most is just how much information and media our students are consuming, and maybe how we're not balancing that out with creativity or more opportunities to create content. Some thinking maybe there would be more screen time, surprised by how much screen time there is. Yeah, I think that's interesting. Terry said the difference between what students think they're doing versus what their teachers think resonates with me, and I agree. And I think it's interesting that perception is reality, right? As the teacher, maybe we think we're creating these really meaningful tasks, but we're not explicitly explaining that relevance to students in a way that's resonating with them. Yeah, I agree. Nicholas and Paige both said surprised about the lack of creating. And I think that's another thing that really stands out to me here in this data is just the imbalance between creating and consuming. So I think it's interesting to think about these numbers, especially in light of the past year and how our instruction may have looked different because we had different resources and opportunities available to us. Yeah, some good stuff here. Because I think we have this opportunity now to be reflective as we go into the summer, hopefully taking time to rest and recharge before we even think about a new school year. But in those moments of resting and recharging, that's when we can have also those moments of reflection, right? What were some things that I did with technology in my classroom in the past year? How can I continue to leverage technology in a way that maybe balances out that creating and consuming um, imbalance that we're seeing in the data? Yeah, for sure. So here we go. Let's look at this big question. I want us to use this question to center our time together today. If you don't teach students how to consume and create responsibly, who is going to do that? Right? We know that these students, even though they were born in what has been termed in the past as the digital native generation, that doesn't mean that they have inherent abilities to consume and navigate content in responsible ways. We also cannot guarantee that they are getting that kind of guide on the side scaffolding in their home life, right? That they have parents that can help them to navigate this vast amount of information that's available to them. And so I would argue that digital citizenship, teaching our students how to be responsible consumers and creators, is a part of our teaching in every single content area. Whether our students are very young, elementary students, or high school students that are right on the verge of adulthood. And so, as we work through this content today, we're going to talk about kind of some key vocabulary around digital citizenship that we can share with our students. And then we're also going to look at some strategies that we can use again with students of any age in any content area, because we all teach our students how to navigate information that is content specific, right? So we can move those skills into that digital space and then also become really reflective about how and what we're asking our students to create in the classroom and how we can help them to bridge that into their real world creating so that they can see that relevance of what they're doing for us in the classroom. So let's start with just a few key terms. I think it can be really helpful because we hear a lot of different terms around digital citizenship to just kind of ground ourselves in these ideas. So the first term I want to talk about is digital literacy. We can think about this in terms of digital life as a language, right? So if I'm just working on building literacy, that is a functional understanding, knowing how to use digital technologies and what to do with them. So if I'm just focusing on digital literacy, that means my students probably still are emerging in their technology skills. And this can be true of all learners, right? Whether they are 5 or 12 or 23, they may or may not know how to use certain apps in a learning context, right? In the context of helping them to navigate information or create something to show what they've learned and are able to do. So if I were building digital literacy within the context of a project in my classroom, then I'm probably going to choose a specific app and have all of my students work in that same tool to create something to show what they've learned, right? So maybe I want all of my students to gain some digital literacy in how to build a slide deck. So I would say, okay, we are all going to use Google Slides for this project because our district uses Google Apps. Here are some tips about how to build your slides so that your design supports the message that you're trying to share. So I'm focusing on students demonstrating their content knowledge, but as the teacher in working to build digital literacy, I'm working on building a functional understanding of how this tool can be best used to share a message. Once students have developed digital literacy in a variety of different tools, so we can do that as we're moving through a school year, adding tools to our students' digital tool belts by exposing them to a wide variety of tools that can be used to develop skill and complete a wide variety of tasks. Then I can move toward digital fluency, right? So literacy is that base level functional understanding of gaining comfort with these tools. Once students have that, they can build fluency. So fluency involves a little bit more critical thinking about the digital tools that students are using, both to access information, to consume what they need, right? When they're doing research and fact checking their research, and when they're creating a product. So digital fluency is knowing when to use a specific technology to achieve a desired outcome and being able to articulate why that chosen technology is the best tool for the task. So notice here now students are thinking more critically about matching the tool to the task to their purpose, thinking about their audience and how best to reach their audience. And then they can also be reflective and explain why they've chosen a particular tool. So I can focus now as the teacher more on the content, the critical thinking, and the way that students are showing what they know, right? So they're focused on choosing the tool. I've just given them a task. Digitally fluent people, right? And this is a really important, we talked about relevance, building relevance, making sure students understand the relevance of the ways they're using technology in the classroom. This is a very relevant skill, being digitally fluent, no matter what path we take in terms of career. As we move about in an increasingly digital world, digitally fluent people are able to create, remix, and share ideas through the use of technology. The idea is the ability to produce content rather than to simply use technology. So instead of telling my students, I want you to use Google Slides, or I want you to use Google Sheets, or I want you to use this specific tool to complete a task, I can focus more on tasks over apps. So I could ask my students to research a topic or organize data create a short film or a podcast, reflect on their learning experiences, or describe what they've learned. Notice that these tasks are really focused on those higher order critical thinking skills, and they create space for students to express choice and voice in how they show what they know, right? So we are designing more universally designed instruction. We are creating space for students to play to their strengths, and we're creating room for relevance and autonomy, right? For students to make their own choices about how they represent their learning. We can do this while still using that universal rubric, right? So even if every project looks a little bit different, showing what that student knows, we can still focus on assessing content knowledge and mastery using a rubric that focuses on what it is we want students to know and be able to do, rather than the format of the final project. So I really like this graphic because I think it provides a really important definition of digital citizenship that brings all of these ideas together, right? So digital citizenship is made up of digital literacy skills and attitudes and understanding how to navigate these digital spaces. We build those foundational skills in digital literacy so that students can become more digitally fluent. And once students have built that foundation of digital fluency, then they are able to really be effective digital citizens that are participating in a digital space in a way that is productive, responsible, and going to serve them well as they move out of our classrooms and into adulthood. So let's look at a few strategies that we can use to cultivate digital skills and media literacy. I pulled this tweet off of my timeline a couple of days ago on Twitter. And so I think we can use micro text like this to help our students start to learn how to break down digital messaging. So we can facilitate this and model it in our classroom by teaching our students not just how to annotate text, but also how to annotate and think about the use of images online, because we see so much media that isn't text-based that we still have to learn to navigate and break down and interpret. So let's work through a little notice and wonder strategy. Take a minute to look at this tweet. And in the chat, I want you to tell me, what do you notice? Let's just start with that. What do you notice? Okay, in the picture, it looks like maybe it's late. You don't see a parent. It maybe looks like this kid is not supposed to be on their device right now. They're kind of hiding in their room. Okay, it's almost like when you were a kid, maybe used to read under the covers, stay up late reading a book, and now it's a phone. Okay, the acronym FOMO is used. Wondering, do parents know what that means? It kind of looks like she's trying to hide. She wants to hide the light from her phone. Oh, yeah, Brittany said anxiety is referenced in the text. And then the focal point of the image is the cell phone. These are great. What else do you notice? Okay, she looks like she may be experiencing some negative emotions. Yeah, liking the use of the word landmine. That definitely has a connotation. Feels like everything is fine until that last moment when it is not, when everything blows up. I notice when I look at this that there's an icon after each of the hashtags. That stands out to me. That doesn't always appear after a hashtag. I also notice that this account name has a check mark after it, so it's verified. So let's move into the wonder stage. So we've noticed these different things. We are noticing it seems to be connoting that social media use could have negative consequences for students. What do you wonder when you look at this tweet? Yep. Who is in the conversation? Who is this person talking to on their cell phone? Mm. Who's the target audience for this tweet? Yeah, how will people react? Someone might wonder, what are the warning signs? What is she doing on her phone? We might be wondering that. Someone talked about wondering about the interactions. When I look down, I see that this tweet has 9 likes and 6 retweets. So I might wonder, okay, this is a screenshot. I wonder if there were more interactions. If I went to look at this tweet now, would there be replies? Would there be a conversation going on about this topic? Mm. Yeah, some great wondering here. Students bring that anxiety within to school. How are schools involved in mental health awareness with social media? Wondering if parents know that how the child really feels. Is the student sharing these different things that they're navigating? These are great wonders. So then we can extend that. We've noticed, we've wondered. Now I want you to tell me in the chat, how could we find more information about these things that we're wondering? Yep. So we could Google it. We can click on the link. I notice a big part of looking at and breaking down a text is when it comes to social media and a post is there's a link here. So I can click on the hashtags and see what else is happening and trending on that hashtag. I could follow this specific account if I thought, okay, Common Sense Education seems like they're putting out some useful content. Maybe I follow this social media account to get more information about this topic. I could click on the link and read the article. I could go to their website and look at other things on their website related to this, right? So there's lots of different ways I can find more information. What I think is really important when we're thinking about how we're using a post like this to talk to our students about navigating online spaces is that so many times students are sliding through their feed, scrolling away. And so all people are seeing is the headline, right? So we have to teach our students as strong media literate, curious people. We have to click beyond the headline, right? We need to read beyond the tweet. We can do that by clicking on the link. We can do that by going to the website and reading other content. We can go do that by looking and seeing if there's conversation about the tweet, how people are interacting with it online. So teaching our students to dig beyond the headline, right? To really dig in. And I think this can be a really great entry point for reluctant readers to dig into longer texts in our classrooms, right? If we can find a content related micro text like this and start breaking it apart, then we can get students curious about digging into a longer text related to a topic that we're teaching in our classroom. So I use this notice and wonder strategy all the time. I'm a former English teacher. I used it with my middle school and high school students and continue to use it now with my college students as a way to help us have that entry point into critically examining a topic or critically examining a text that we're looking at or a piece of media. So I know for many of us, social media access at school is very limited. There are other tools that we can use to think about modeling that social learning and that media literacy that we just practiced with our notice and wonder protocol. Two of my favorite tools for this are Flipgrid and Padlet. Now, I do know there are some districts where even some of these social learning tools are limited. And so obviously you would want to check with your district first to make sure that your district supports the use of these ed tech tools. I really love Flipgrid as a way to help students practice interacting with one another in an online space. So we've all probably seen on social media when a comment section of a post gets a little bit out of hand, a little unruly. And so when we use a tool like Flipgrid, which is video based, or Padlet, which can be video or text based, it can help students to develop that ability to interact with one another in an online discussion in a way that is respectful and productive. We often, I think, when we think about online discussion boards, probably think about that time we took a class in college where we had to post so many times a week, but it wasn't really an authentic discussion. We were just doing it because we wanted to earn the points. But really, that's a relevant real life skill for our students to develop because we see people engaging with one another in online discussion across all social media platforms. It was really interesting this past year. I had some of my undergrad students, when they would record their Flipgrid videos, they would record them in the style of TikTok videos, right? So not having to navigate some of the privacy issues of TikTok, but pulling that style of video using the text boxes on top of their video to share meaningful content with their peers. It was so interesting how those videos generated some really authentic feedback and discussion among students. So we can mimic some of the things that are happening in those social media spaces in safer spaces that are designed to protect the privacy of students in the K-12 classroom. We also want to keep balance in mind. So thinking about how students are consuming and creating. We looked at that data at the beginning of the session together, and we can see just from looking at the numbers that right now consuming and creating in many cases are out of balance. When I look at those numbers, I think about my own consuming behaviors, and I'm probably consuming more than I'm creating, even as an adult. So if we think about and reflect on our own behaviors, think about the structure of our assignments and how they can maybe balance the scales when it comes to consuming and creating. And I know that many of us probably are really tired of thinking about how we are being strategic with online learning, but I also think it's important to remember that even if we are all face to face moving forward, we still want to use those digital tools to cultivate digital citizenship in our classrooms and help our students be strong creators and consumers. So it can be really easy to rely on consuming, right? We're going to watch this video and then we'll talk about the video. Well, what if when we watch the video, we embed some formative assessment in the form of questions? A tool that would be great for that would be Edpuzzle. Or what if students consume some information, but then they create something with a partner or a small group to show what they know. So really being strategic and making sure that we use technology to maximize creativity as much as we can. We have all of this access to information, but we want to make sure that we are also taking advantage of the creative opportunities in technology. So I'm going to pause right there, and I would love to go in breakout rooms. And I know we have Ashley in the background. Ashley, can you do breakout rooms on your end? Because I don't think I have that capability from where I'm at.
I sure can.
Okay, perfect. Let's do groups of 4, if you don't mind. That give us about the right number?
Yes, it looks like there will be 3 to 4 participants per room.
Okay, perfect. So in your group, you'll have 3 to 4 of you. Many of you, I'm sure, can think of examples of how you have worked to balance the scales this past year in your own classroom. So I want you to just take some time for discussion. What are some things that you've heard so far in the session that are standing out to you and resonating with you? How have you worked to balance the creative and consuming scales in your own classroom with your students? Because you all are experts too. You can all learn from one another. So it's about to be 2:45. Let's take about 12 minutes in breakout rooms, and then we'll come back together and take a stretch break before we wrap things up. Does that work? Can give me a thumbs up on your end if you don't mind. You got some emojis you can use. Perfect. Awesome. All right, so we'll head into breakout rooms so you can take some time to debrief and discuss, and then we'll come back together to a whole group right around 3 o'clock and take a 5-minute stretch break before we move forward. Welcome back. We've got a few more people rejoining us in the main room. I hope you were able to have some good discussion with your group around these topics. As you're rejoining the main room, do me a favor in the chat and tell me something that you heard in your breakout room that stood out with you. What's something you learned from your small group, or something that you discussed about this topic that felt important? So tell us in the chat what you learned from your breakout room.
Just come on.
Mute it. Or you can unmute and tell us with your voice, whatever feels right to you. Perfect. Yeah, building those skills alongside teaching our content can be really, really important. Our students kind of do know, I mean, they know how to navigate technology for entertainment. This is something that Addie said, but they do sometimes struggle with developing and cultivating those more focused skills, right? So researching, creating, and so making sure we create space to build those skills can be really important. Yeah, and I know a lot of students are tired of being on devices. They want to do things face to face and get away from the computer in some instances. Yes, absolutely. I agree, Paige. These conversations are really important for students of all ages, whether we're working with early learners or middle school or high school learners. Striking that balance is very difficult in the beginning of the year. Yeah, I agree, Nikki. She said striking a balance with tech tools can be difficult at the beginning of the year because students don't necessarily know how to use tools. So you spend as much time teaching technology as the content, right? So putting in that front end work of teaching the different tools and scaffolding that can definitely have a payoff as you move through the year, but it is an investment of time for sure. And I agree, Tracy, the students really need to find a balance. And often it can be really challenging to self-regulate, self-monitor, and build that balance on their own. And so we can model how to create that balance by helping them to have that kind of balance in the way we produce and consume and create content in our own classrooms. Okay, let's take a break before we move forward. So it's 3:01. Let's take a 5-minute stretch break. And then when we come back, we'll go through just a few more strategies and resources that you can carry forward, explore this summer, and hopefully will find useful as you move into a new school year. And then we'll call it a day, probably a little bit early. So go on and take a 5-minute stretch break. It's 3:01 right now, so we'll get started again at 3:06. Get back to their computer in case they took a little break. All right, and I'll move you forward. Some great conversation in the chat about what you shared in your breakout rooms with one another, really thinking about why balance is important and how we can cultivate creating, consuming balance in our classrooms through the types of assignments that we're creating and projects we're creating for our students. So let's look at a few more strategies and resources before we call it a day. One way that we can support our students in cultivating balance in their personal lives is through analyzing screen time together. I really love this activity from Common Sense Education. So as you know, whether you're on Android or an iOS device, you can track your screen time and pay attention to where you're using your time on a computer. I really love this activity because it's a great data literacy activity. It really gets students thinking critically about where they're spending their time on their device, but it's also a great math lesson to have them look at that data, break the data down, reflect on it, and then make some decisions about what they might want to change in their habits. This is a great activity for adults too, for grown-ups. So there's a great graphic organizer here that you can make a copy of. You could also, this is for older grades like high school, but you could scaffold this down to work for a variety of grade levels. I'm going to stop sharing and then reshare my screen so that you can see this graphic organizer. Give me just a minute. All right, so I really love this scaffolding process through this graphic organizer. So having students look at a video about screen time, how much is too much. There's a lot of conversation in the popular media about screen time, and there's a lot of research about screen time. And what many scholars find is that quality is more important than quantity. Even if students are spending a lot of time on a screen, if it's high quality time, so they are creating information or they are learning, whether that's with a teacher or a peer, if they're collaborating around the information they're consuming, that often is going to lead to more critical thinking and be higher quality screen time than just simply passive consumption on their own, right? So they might watch the video, chart some takeaways, questions that they have, things that they can relate or not relate to within the video. And then they can look at their own screen time, right? What describes your screen time? Why do you feel like it's too little, too much, or just the right amount? And then thinking about their own use when they look at that screen time. Is it active use? Are you posting content, creating things, collaborating with people? Or are you just passively scrolling, watching video after video, rather than interacting with other people or creating content? And then thinking about what times of day they use their device and developing ultimately their own responsible use plan. So I think this is a really interesting activity you could do with your students, maybe at the beginning of the year when you're working on building those digital literacy skills, to get students thinking about how are you using technology in the classroom? How are you using it in your time outside of school? And do you want to make any changes to that time to help you be more productive in your use of technology? So I think this is a great starting point. You could make this a much smaller activity, or it could be something that you revisit at different points in the year. So
I'm sorry, will you send us that, or do you have a site that we can go get that?
yes, I will put that on the chat. You want me to put it in the chat right now?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so here's the link to that graphic organizer. You can make a copy of that, use that copy to your heart's content. All right. And there's a whole activity related to this as well on Common Sense Education. I'm going to take you to their website in just a moment. That one is right now. Okay, so we've talked a lot about digital citizenship this afternoon. Two of my favorite resources when it comes to digital citizenship curriculum and resources are PBS Learning Media, which has a lot of media literacy activities and lesson plans that you can use in your classroom for a variety of content areas and grade levels, K through 12. And then my absolute favorite resource is Common Sense Education. This website has so many free resources for educators and parents and for students themselves. I love to share it with my pre-service teachers that I work with because they have some really excellent app reviews so that you know that the resources you're using in your classroom are going to help students to navigate digital spaces safely and responsibly. So I'm putting their website in the chat for you to pull up. I'm going to stop sharing my slides for just a minute and show you their website. So we've been talking specifically about digital citizenship today. One thing I love about Common Sense Education is that they have a full digital citizenship curriculum for grades K through 12. They have quick activities that you can do with your students, as well as full lesson plans that you can use in your classroom. I also like that they have bilingual resources, so you can look at their resources in Spanish as well. And then they have a huge library of EdTech reviews, which I think can be really helpful for teachers as we're working to navigate all the resources available to us. I love that they give privacy ratings to all of these apps and digital tools we can use in our classroom, so that we can know as the teacher that we are making sure we are prioritizing students' privacy, making sure that their data is handled responsibly by the different tools that we're using in our classroom. So I really appreciate all of the resources that are available at Common Sense Education. If I could pick one website as a resource for teachers forever, it would be Common Sense. So let's go back to these slides one more time. I also think that this can still be a great resource, even as we are hopefully moving our way out of the pandemic and looking at a more normal feeling school year in the fall. Wide Open School is a great resource in terms of digital resources that you can bring into your classroom and use face-to-face with students. Or maybe you will still have, who knows, some students that are learning virtually, depending on your teaching context. So I'll put the link to Wide Open Schools in the chat as well. One thing I really like about this website is the way that it breaks down the resources into really helpful categories. So I'll show you what that website looks like on my screen. This can provide student activities and resources for families. I like that they have resources for different content areas, but also for social emotional skills, so that you can support your learners in a variety of different ways. You can expand all of these different topics to look at different resources. And then they even have resources to support internet access for your families who maybe need help getting access to the internet at home. So I would encourage you to explore some of these different resources and consider how they might help you to better support your students in cultivating that consuming, creating balance. So I know it's 3:15 and not 4 o'clock, but I would love for us to wrap things up with a little bit of conversation, reflecting on what you learned today. And then I would like to give you the gift of some extra time to have back to do the things that you need to do this afternoon. I know teachers are busy and we always can use more time. So tell me in the chat. I like to end class when I'm teaching with these same protocols. I think it's a great way to help us reflect on what we've learned and consider how we can carry our learning forward. In the chat, tell me what you liked, what you'll try, what you learned, and what you wonder about today's topics. Thanks, Brittany. Glad that you could be here with us today. Yeah, I think digital literacy is a big term. So, really breaking that down and considering the difference between digital literacy and digital fluency can be really helpful. Great. Addie said, liking that tracking your screen time. That is a super helpful tool, I think, to get our students being more reflective about how they're spending their time. It is definitely a struggle to find that balance. So we are all just on that journey together, working to be more reflective in our own practice and consider how we can create these opportunities for our students. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Glad to hear we're liking Common Sense. And I will say another thing I really like about Common Sense Education is that they do a lot of research as a nonprofit. And so the data that we looked at the beginning was part of the Common Sense Census. They also have released more current data related to technology access and use during the pandemic. And so I would encourage you, if you're interested in looking at where the numbers have gone in the past year, to look at some of those research reports on the Common Sense website. Yeah, I love the use of Flipgrid as a great way to help our students learn how to interact appropriately, respectfully online. And they have some really great topics that are pre-made on the Flipgrid website that I think are great conversation starters for our students. And they connect to a variety of content area topics. Yeah, that's a great thought. Michelle said she wonders if students realize how much time they spend on their devices and where their time is spent. And I think that that's true of our students, but I speaking for myself, I think I find myself surprised sometimes at the new week when I get a screen time report to look at where I've spent my time in the last week. And so I think it presents a really powerful opportunity for us to make ourselves models to show how we're using our screen time. And then when our students see that opportunity for us to model and be vulnerable maybe about where we want to make changes, that can encourage that reflection in our students as well, especially with our secondary students, I think, for sure. All right. Thanks for learning with me today. I so appreciate all of you making time for some professional learning, especially as we are right here at the end of a school year. And I know that you are all probably ready for a rest moving into the summer. I very much appreciate you spending time with me today. If we can ever connect in the future, or if I can be of any help to you, please let me know. We have 16 more sessions this summer to help you continue to extend your learning. And I just want to say thank you all so much for what you do for our K-12 learners. I so appreciate teachers, and I know it's been a long school year. So I hope you all have a restful summer. And thank you so much for spending time with us today.